we have to deter China from pursuing this course of action. And the only way for us to do it is to strengthen ourselves both individually and collectively against a very aggressive China for whatever motivation.
There's a moment in geopolitics when warnings stop sounding like routine statements and start feeling like a countdown. That's kind of where the Philippines is right now. When Gilberto Teodoro Jr., better known as Gibo, talks about urgently upgrading air defense systems, it doesn't come off as political noise. It feels like someone looking at the map, looking at the trends, and realizing the gap is getting a little too real, a little too fast. And honestly, if you zoom out and look at the region, you start to see why this isn't just another policy discussion. It's a warning. The Philippines sits in one of the most strategically sensitive zones in the world, right between the South China Sea and the broader Western Pacific. That's not just geography, that's exposure. Every major power movement, every patrol, every exercise, it all passes nearby. And over the past few years, those movements haven't slowed down. They've intensified. You've got advanced fighter jets flying longer patrols, surveillance aircraft mapping everything, drones, cheap, persistent, everywhere. And then there's the big one, missiles. Not the old school kind people imagine, but long-range, precision-guided systems that can hit targets hundreds, even thousands of kilometers away. The kind that changes the entire equation of defense. And that's exactly the problem. Right now, the Philippines doesn't have a fully integrated air defense system. Not a layered one, not a nationwide shield, just pieces. Some radar coverage here, some missile systems there, but nothing that ties it all together into a single responsive network. It's like having security cameras without a control room. You might see something but reacting in time? That's another story. For decades, that gap didn't feel urgent. The country's military focus was mostly internal: counterinsurgency, domestic stability, and disaster response. Air defense against advanced external threats wasn't the priority. But the region changed. Fast. China's military modernization alone has shifted the balance dramatically. We're talking about integrated air defense networks, long-range strike systems, and a level of coordination that smaller states just can't easily match. And it's not just China. Across Asia, countries are upgrading, quietly, steadily, but very seriously. So when Teodoro talks about credible defense, he's not just talking about having equipment, he's talking about deterrence. Because in modern strategy, the goal isn't always to fight, it's to make sure no one wants to fight you in the first place. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Without a strong air defense system, deterrence weakens. Think about it. If your airspace can't be fully monitored, if incoming threats can't be reliably intercepted, then any adversary knows there's a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities, in geopolitics, don't stay theoretical for long. The Philippine Air Force has made progress, no doubt. The acquisition of FA-50 jets brought back supersonic capability after years of absence. New radar systems are being installed. There's movement, there's effort. But compared to the scale of modern threats, it's still not enough. One of the biggest gaps is early warning. Modern air defense starts with knowing what's coming, early, clearly, and continuously. That means long-range radar coverage, airborne surveillance platforms, and real-time data integration. Without that, even the best missile systems can be caught reacting too late. Then comes interception capability. Surface-to-air missiles, layered at different ranges, capable of engaging everything from drones to cruise missiles to aircraft. Right now, the Philippines has started building this capability, but it's still in its early stages. Coverage is limited. Depth is limited. And in a real scenario, saturation, multiple incoming threats at once, becomes a serious concern. There's also the issue of integration. Modern defense isn't just about buying systems, it's about connecting them. Command and control, communication networks, decision-making speed, that's what turns separate tools into an actual defense system. And building that takes time, training, and serious investment. Of course, none of this happens in a vacuum. The Philippines has alliances, especially with the United States, and those partnerships matter a lot. Joint exercises, intelligence sharing, technology transfers, they all help bridge the gap. Agreements like EDCA have expanded cooperation, giving the Philippines access to advanced systems and training environments. But here's where it gets tricky. Relying too much on allies can solve short-term problems while creating long-term dependence. And Teodoro seems very aware of that. His emphasis on self-reliance isn't about distancing from allies, it's about ensuring that, when it really matters, the Philippines can stand on its own. Because alliances are strongest when both sides bring capability to the table. Then there's the political and economic side of it all. Building a modern air defense system isn't cheap. We're talking billions of dollars over many years. Radar networks, missile batteries, aircraft, training, maintenance, it adds up fast. And for a developing country balancing infrastructure, healthcare, and education, those decisions aren't easy. You can already hear the debate. Should that money go to defense or to social programs? It's a fair question. But it's also a classic one. Security and development have always competed for resources. The difference now is that the threats are evolving faster than before. Waiting too long to invest in defense doesn't just delay capability, it widens the gap. And gaps, once they get big enough, become very hard to close. There are also external reactions to consider. Any major upgrade in military capability, especially in a tense region, will be noticed. Some neighbors might see it as defensive, others might see it as escalation. Managing that perception becomes part of the strategy itself. That's why diplomacy still matters. A lot. Air defense, by nature, is defensive. It doesn't project power outward, it protects inward. And that gives the Philippines a strong argument. This isn't about aggression, it's about security. Still, in a region as sensitive as Southeast Asia, even defensive moves can ripple outward, so everything has to be calibrated. Carefully. Looking ahead, the path is pretty clear, even if it's not easy. The Philippines needs a layered air defense system. That means long-range detection, mid-range tracking, and short-range interception all working together. It means investing in people, training operators, engineers, analysts. It means building infrastructure that can support advanced systems long-term, not just during initial deployment. And maybe most importantly, it means consistency. Defense planning doesn't work if it resets every few years. It needs continuity across administrations, across political cycles. Because the threats won't pause just because policies change. At the end of the day, what Teodoro is really saying isn't complicated. The world around the Philippines is changing, faster than before, more technologically, more strategically, more unpredictably. And the country has a choice: adapt at the same pace or risk falling behind. Air defense might not be the most visible part of military power. There are no dramatic images, no headlines like warships or fighter jets taking off. But it's the shield behind everything else, the quiet layer that makes all other capabilities possible. Without it, even strong forces operate with risk. With it, a nation gains something more than protection. It gains confidence. And right now, that confidence is exactly what the Philippines is trying to build.
A major military move in the Indo-Pacific. The United States plans to deploy more advanced missile systems to the Philippines. It comes as Washington and Manila step up efforts to push back against China's growing pressure in the South China Sea.
Right.
We are accelerating the deployment of advanced capabilities to the Philippines to strengthen deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. That line, delivered after the latest U.S.-Philippines strategic talks, didn't just land in a press room. It landed across the region. Because let's be honest, when Washington says advanced capabilities, everyone knows what that means. Missiles. And not the symbolic kind. So here's the real question. Are we watching the quiet militarization of the South China Sea turn into something far more permanent? In 2026, the United States plans to deploy additional advanced missile systems to the Philippines. Not as a one-off drill, not as a passing exercise, but as part of a broader deterrence framework that's clearly becoming structural. This follows repeated maritime confrontations between Philippine vessels and Chinese forces, water cannons, dangerous maneuvers, near collisions that feel like they're one bad decision away from something worse. I don't think this is just another defense headline. It feels different. For decades, the Philippines was often described as a treaty ally. Yes, but not necessarily a frontline state. That perception is changing fast. The South China Sea is no longer a distant maritime dispute. It's becoming a testing ground for how far China will push, and how far the United States is willing to stand its ground. Think about what this looks like on the ground. A remote airfield in northern Luzon. A joint U.S., Philippines exercise under the banner of Balikatan. American personnel working alongside Filipino troops. New infrastructure. Upgraded runways. Warehouses designed not just for humanitarian supplies, but for systems that shift the regional balance. That's not abstract geopolitics. That's hardware. That's the range. That's a reach. And once missiles are in place, even rotationally, the strategic math changes. For Beijing, this isn't just about Manila. It's about encirclement narratives, about U.S. alliance networks tightening across the first island chain. For Washington, it's about restoring credible deterrence, proving that gray zone coercion will not go unanswered. For Manila, though, it's about survival, about not facing maritime pressure alone. The stakes feel heavier because tensions aren't theoretical anymore. We've seen repeated confrontations at Second Thomas Shoal, Coast Guard ships colliding, water cannons blasting supply boats. Each incident chips away at stability. Each one raises the temperature. So when the U.S. signals more missile deployments in 2026, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening after a pattern, and patterns matter. This isn't just modernization. It's a policy shift. The annual U.S.-Philippines strategic talks made that clear. Beyond deployments, the framework includes expanded joint exercises, modernization of Philippine defense forces, interoperability upgrades, and deeper integration. It's layered. It's coordinated. It's long-term. And here's the uncomfortable part. Deterrence works. Until it doesn't. Missiles can stabilize a region by raising the cost of aggression. But they also lock in positions. They reduce room for ambiguity. They make signaling sharper, clearer, sometimes harsher. Are we witnessing a necessary correction in the balance of power? Or the slow cementing of a new military frontline in Southeast Asia? That's why this moment matters. Because what's unfolding isn't just about 2026. It's about whether the South China Sea becomes a managed competition, tense but contained, or a hardened strategic fault line where one miscalculation could ripple across the Indo-Pacific. And honestly, the region feels closer to that line than it has in years. You can't make sense of today's missile deployments without stepping back and looking at the architecture underneath it all. This isn't a sudden romance. It's a security relationship that has survived wars, leadership changes, public protests, and moments when both sides seriously questioned each other.
Next day in Washington, a first step is taken in the direction demanded by Dewey as the United States and the Philippines sign a mutual defense treaty.
The anchor is the Mutual Defense Treaty signed in 1951. That agreement, forged in the early Cold War, binds both countries to act if either is attacked in the Pacific. On paper, the language sounds restrained. Meet the common danger. In reality, it has always carried weight. For Manila, it is an insurance policy. For Washington, it is a foothold in a strategically sensitive region. And every time tensions rise in the South China Sea, people quietly return to that document and ask, does it still hold? Decades later, the relationship evolved with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement in 2014. EDCA did something practical. It expanded rotational U.S. presence and allowed access to agreed Philippine bases without establishing permanent American bases, a crucial political distinction. It was subtle but significant. Instead of symbolic visits, you had infrastructure upgrades, prepositioned equipment, and deeper interoperability. It modernized the alliance without rewriting it. Then there is geography, and geography does not negotiate. The Philippines sits along what strategists call the first island chain, a line of territories stretching from Japan down through Taiwan and into Southeast Asia. In military planning circles, this chain functions as a natural containment arc against Chinese naval expansion into the wider Pacific. And at the northern tip of the Philippines lies Batanes, facing the Bashi Channel. That narrow waterway between Taiwan and the Philippines is not just a stretch of sea. It is a choke point. Submarines pass through it. Surface vessels maneuver through it. In any Taiwan contingency, it becomes instantly critical. Geography makes the Philippines unavoidable in regional strategy. At the same time, China's expansive maritime claims complicate everything. Beijing's so-called 9-dash line overlaps with the Philippines' exclusive economic zone and runs contrary to international maritime law as interpreted by the Hague Tribunal in 2016. On the water, this isn't theoretical. It looks like Coast Guard ships shadowing supply boats. It looks like water cannons blasting wooden hulls near 2nd Thomas Shoal. It looks like collisions that everyone insists were accidental, yet somehow keep happening. Each encounter chips away at stability. Each one tests resolve. So when we talk about new missile deployments, we're not talking about a random policy decision. We're talking about a treaty legacy from 1951, expanded access under EDCA, strategic geography that cannot be moved, and maritime confrontations that keep raising the temperature. History, law, and location are colliding in real time. And that's why the current moment feels less like a temporary spike and more like a structural shift. Let's strip away the vague language for a second. When officials say enhanced capabilities or advanced systems, it sounds diplomatic. Clean. Almost harmless. It's not. Some of these systems are already on the ground. In April 2024, the United States positioned the Typhoon mid-range missile system in northern Luzon. That wasn't symbolic. The Typhoon system can launch SM-6 and Tomahawk missiles, and that changes the strategic geometry overnight. The SM-6 is versatile. It can engage aircraft, ships, and even certain missile threats. The Tomahawk, though, is what really grabs attention. With a range reaching roughly 2,500 kilometers, it extends far beyond disputed reefs. From northern Luzon, that reach stretches across large sections of the South China Sea and deep into areas hosting PLA naval and air infrastructure. Pause there for a second. From Philippine soil, assets on the Chinese mainland edge into range calculations. That's not a theoretical deterrence. That's operational depth. And then there's the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, and MESIS, deployed in Batanes, facing the Bashi Channel. It's a mobile, ground-based anti-ship system designed to complicate any naval movement through choke points. In a Taiwan contingency or a South China Sea escalation, that narrow corridor suddenly becomes a heavily monitored and potentially contested transit route. It's quiet, it's mobile, it's designed to deny access. And this is just the beginning. Following recent strategic consultations, U.S. and Philippine officials agreed to increase deployments of cutting-edge missile and unmanned systems. That means more integration, more rotational presence, more hardware that doesn't leave after an exercise ends. Philippine Ambassador Jose Manuel Romualdez put it bluntly, it's a kind of system that's really very sophisticated and will be deployed here in the hope that, down the road, we will be able to get our own. That line matters, because this isn't just about hosting American systems, it's about capability transfer. about Manila eventually fielding similar systems independently. That's a long-term force modernization trajectory, not a temporary posture adjustment. And here's the strategic headline no one can ignore. The Tomahawk's range places portions of southern China and segments of PLA infrastructure within reach from positions in northern Luzon. That recalibrates deterrence. It signals that gray zone pressure at sea now carries potential long-range consequences. It inserts the Philippines directly into the wider Indo-Pacific strike network. For Beijing, this is a strategic complication. For Washington, it's a layered deterrence. For Manila, it's leverage and risk. Missiles don't just sit in storage. They sit in calculations. And once they're factored in, the entire regional equation shifts. Let's be real, missiles don't move without a reason. And governments don't escalate language unless something has shifted underneath. In recent joint statements, Washington and Manila didn't soften their tone. They described China's actions in the South China Sea as illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive. That's not diplomatic fluff. That's strategic framing. It signals that what's happening at sea, water cannon blasts, dangerous maneuvers, harassment of resupply missions, is no longer being treated as routine friction. It's being labeled as a pattern. The official line is clear. This is about deterrence, not provocation. The idea is simple in theory. Raise the cost of further assertiveness so that escalation becomes irrational. Strength, visible and credible, is supposed to prevent miscalculation. Classic deterrence logic. Old school balance of power thinking. But deterrence is a psychological game. It only works if the other side believes you mean it. That's where alliance signaling comes in. Every missile deployment, every joint exercise, every infrastructure upgrade reinforces the credibility of the Mutual Defense Treaty. The message isn't subtle. Manila is not alone. If its forces, vessels, or aircraft are attacked in the Pacific, the treaty framework activates. The deployments make that promise tangible, and it's not just Beijing that's watching. Other ASEAN states are watching too. Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia. They all navigate their own delicate balancing acts with China. When Washington deepens its security posture with the Philippines, it sends a regional signal. The United States is still invested, still present, still willing to underwrite security guarantees. Then there's the broader strategic layer. These deployments align with the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, a multi-billion-dollar U.S. effort, exceeding $40 billion in cumulative funding, designed to counter China's military buildup across the Indo-Pacific. The initiative isn't abstract. It funds infrastructure, missile systems, logistics nodes, joint training, and rapid deployment capabilities across the theater. In other words, what's happening in the Philippines isn't isolated. It's part of a networked strategy stretching across the first island chain, from Japan down through Taiwan and into Southeast Asia. A lattice of access points, rotational forces, interoperable systems, the kind of posture designed to complicate any large-scale military move. Zoom out, and you see the logic. China expands Coast Guard and naval pressure in disputed waters. The U.S. reinforces alliance commitments. The Philippines upgrades its defensive posture. Each move triggers another. It's a cycle, but one rooted in deterrence theory rather than immediate confrontation. Still, here's the tension. The more visible and capable the systems become, the more the region shifts from ambiguous gray zone competition to structured military positioning. And once posture becomes permanent, rolling it back gets a lot harder. That's the strategic bet being made right now. That stronger deterrence today prevents a much more dangerous crisis tomorrow. If you thought Beijing would shrug at American missile systems sitting a few hundred kilometers from its coastline, yeah, no. China's response has been sharp, repetitive, and very public. Officials have condemned the deployments as destabilizing, accusing Washington of militarizing the region and turning the Philippines into a forward operating platform. The language is familiar: threat to regional peace, Cold War mentality, external interference. But this time, the tone carries more urgency. Beijing didn't just criticize. It formally demanded that the missile systems be removed. Manila said no. That refusal matters. It signals that the Philippines is no longer hedging quietly. It's choosing alignment openly. And that's a big psychological shift in Southeast Asian diplomacy, where strategic ambiguity used to be the safer play. Still, this isn't a total diplomatic breakdown. Communication channels between Manila and Beijing remain open. That's important. High-level talks continue. Maritime hotlines exist. Economic ties haven't vanished. Trade still flows. There's a strange duality here: friction at sea, dialogue in conference rooms. At the same time, China maintains its counter-narrative. Beijing accuses the Philippines of intruding into what it calls its sovereign waters, framing incidents as defensive responses rather than coercive actions. In other words, both sides are telling completely different stories about the same events. That narrative clash isn't accidental. It's part of a broader information contest. China has long invested in shaping public opinion and elite discourse within the Philippines through media messaging, business networks, diplomatic outreach, and economic leverage. The United States, for its part, reinforces alliance messaging through defense cooperation, public diplomacy, and visible military exercises. Both sides understand that domestic perception in Manila is strategic terrain. Because here's the reality: missile deployments aren't just about hardware, they're about legitimacy. If the Filipino public views the systems as protective, the alliance deepens. If they view them as escalatory, political resistance grows. Beijing knows this. Washington knows this. So beyond the ships and missiles, there's a quieter battle unfolding. In newsrooms, policy forums, academic spaces, even social media feeds. The region isn't just watching a military standoff, it's watching a contest over narrative dominance. And in geopolitics, perception can shape outcomes almost as much as force projection. Zoom out for a second. This isn't just Washington versus Beijing. It's the entire region adjusting in real time. Take the South China Sea flashpoints. Incidents near Scarborough Shoal, collisions, standoffs, water cannons don't just stay local. They ripple outward. Every close encounter between Coast Guard vessels sends insurance rates up, markets twitching, and defense planners back to their maps. These aren't abstract reefs. They've become symbols of how far gray zone pressure can go before it turns kinetic. And because of that, Allied naval cooperation is becoming more visible. Joint drills now frequently include Australia, Canada, and other partners operating alongside US and Philippine forces. You see coordinated patrols, interoperability exercises, and messaging about freedom of navigation. It's subtle, but deliberate, a multilateral front reinforcing maritime norms rather than leaving Manila isolated. What's interesting, and honestly underappreciated, is how ASEAN states are reacting. They're not lining up neatly behind one pole or the other. Instead, Southeast Asian countries are diversifying. Buying equipment from multiple suppliers, expanding exercises with Japan, India, Australia, Europe, not just the US. It's hedging, but in a more sophisticated way. No one wants to be forced into a binary choice. So they're building options. That diversification tells you something. The region doesn't see this as a temporary spike. It sees structural competition settling in. Of course, not everyone agrees this trajectory is stabilizing. Supporters argue the logic is straightforward. Credible deterrence prevents coercion. If China knows escalation will trigger real military consequences, it recalculates. Stronger posture equals fewer missteps. In that view, missile deployments aren't provocative, they're preventative. Critics push back. They worry about escalation ladders, about what happens if a confrontation near a disputed shoal spirals while long-range systems sit within striking distance. They question whether increased militarization narrows diplomatic space. And there's an ongoing debate about permanence. Rotational deployments can be dialed up or down. Permanent basing sends a different signal entirely. The distinction matters strategically and politically. There's also a broader anxiety. Once advanced systems are in place, reversing them becomes politically costly. Infrastructure creates inertia. Alliances deepen through logistics, not just rhetoric. So the debate isn't just about missiles. It's about trajectory. The U.S. missile build-out in the Philippines marks a serious upgrade in alliance depth, not symbolic, not temporary optics, structural. It reflects a broader Indo-Pacific competition shaped by China's increasingly assertive maritime posture. What began as Coast Guard encounters and legal disputes is evolving into layered deterrence architecture along the first island chain. And here's the part that really matters. How these deployments evolve over the next decade will shape more than military balance. They will influence investor confidence, shipping routes, diplomatic alignments, and crisis stability across Southeast Asia. We're not just watching a defense adjustment, we're watching the region redefine its strategic center of gravity. The question isn't whether the balance is shifting. It's whether this new equilibrium holds or hardens into something far more combustible. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion. What if the most important move the Pentagon is making in the Indo-Pacific is the one it is not loudly announcing? In recent months, headlines have fixated on carrier deployments, missile tests, and sharp diplomatic exchanges around Taiwan. But beneath the noise, a quieter strategy is tightening into place. U.S. defense planners are not drawing new red lines on maps or issuing ultimatums. Instead, they are reinforcing geography itself, turning islands into instruments of deterrence. This is the logic behind the first island chain, a strategy that speaks softly but carries enormous strategic weight. Consider a simple, almost mundane example. When U.S. and allied forces expand access agreements in the Philippines, upgrade airfields in Japan's Southwest Islands, or deepen interoperability with Taiwan's defenses, none of it looks like a declaration of war. There are no dramatic speeches, no crisis summits. Yet taken together, these moves reshape the battlefield before any shot is fired. They complicate an adversary's planning, raise the costs of coercion, and quietly signal that control of the Western Pacific will not come easy. This is deterrence by denial and action, winning by making aggression impractical rather than by threatening retaliation. The geography makes this strategy brutally effective. The first island chain arcs from Japan through Taiwan and the Philippines towards Southeast Asia, sitting astride the Indo-Pacific's most vital arteries. More than half of global maritime trade flows through these waters, alongside energy shipments and the sea lanes that underpin the global semiconductor supply chain. The Taiwan Strait, the Bashi Channel, and the South China Sea are not abstract lines on a naval chart. They are economic lifelines. Any disruption here would ripple through markets, factories, and energy grids worldwide. That is precisely why these narrow passages matter so much to both military planners and global investors. Seen this way, The Pentagon's Indo-Pacific posture is not about provoking confrontation, but about shaping choices. By reinforcing the first island chain, the United States and its partners are betting on a strategy that is intentionally understated, yet deeply consequential. The message is clear without being shouted. Coercion will be contested, escalation will be costly, and the balance of power in the Western Pacific will be decided less by dramatic gestures than by steady, disciplined preparation. That is the silent signal, and it is being sent every day. The first island chain did not emerge from today's headlines or recent tensions. It was born in the anxiety-soaked early years of the Cold War, when Washington was still learning how to contain power without triggering catastrophe. In 1951, as the Korean War raged and communist influence spread across Asia, U.S. strategists began to think less in terms of borders and more in terms of oceans. One influential policymaker captured the logic bluntly at the time. Control the seas around Asia, and you control the terms of power projection. The island arc from Japan to Southeast Asia was no longer just geography. It became a defensive wall made of land, sea, and access. Back then, the concept was simple and unapologetically naval. The United States anchored its strategy on forward bases, carrier strike groups, and choke point control to block Soviet and Chinese fleets from breaking into the wider Pacific. Okinawa, Subic Bay, and alliances with Japan and the Philippines were the physical manifestations of this thinking. The objective was straightforward: deny adversaries freedom of movement, keep U.S. forces close to Asia's rim, and ensure that any attempt to project power eastward would run into a wall of Allied presence. But history did not stand still, and neither did the first island chain. As technology advanced and threats diversified, the strategy quietly expanded beyond ships and harbors. Today's version is far more layered and far more subtle. Naval presence still matters, but it is now reinforced by air power, long-range precision missiles, cyber capabilities, space-based surveillance, and diplomatic alignment. Instead of a single line of defense, the first island chain has become a multi-domain web designed to complicate, delay, and deter across every level of conflict. Its historical impact on the regional balance of power is hard to overstate. During the Cold War, the island chain effectively bottled up Soviet naval ambitions in the Pacific, limiting Moscow's ability to threaten sea lanes or challenge U.S. dominance beyond Asia's periphery. After the 1990s, as the Soviet Union collapsed and China's rise accelerated, the same geographic logic was repurposed. The chain became the backbone of U.S.-Japan security cooperation, the rationale for renewed defense ties with the Philippines, and a critical, if often understated, pillar of U.S.-Taiwan defense relations. What makes the first island chain enduring is not nostalgia, but adaptability. It is one of those rare strategic ideas that survives decades because it evolves with power, technology, and politics. From Cold War containment to modern deterrence by denial, it has remained a quiet constant in an otherwise turbulent region. Proof that sometimes the most influential strategies are the ones that never leave the map. At the heart of today's first island chain strategy sits a concept that sounds deceptively calm, but is anything but passive: strong denial defense. This is the Pentagon's answer to a hard-earned lesson of modern warfare. Wars are not only lost on the battlefield, they are often lost in the planning room. If an adversary believes it can achieve its objectives quickly and decisively, the temptation to act grows. Strong denial defense is designed to kill that belief before it ever takes root. In simple terms, denial is about slamming the door shut, not threatening what happens after someone breaks in. Under this framework, U.S. and allied forces focus on preventing access and freedom of operation inside the first island chain, whether at sea, in the air, or across the electromagnetic and cyber domains. The goal is to make naval incursions fail, air superiority unattainable, and rapid fate's accomplice impossible. If an operation cannot succeed in its opening phase, its political and military logic collapses. This stands in sharp contrast to punishment-based deterrence, which dominated much of Cold War nuclear thinking. Punishment threatens devastating retaliation after aggression occurs, but it also carries severe escalation risks, especially in a nuclear-armed environment. Denial, by comparison, is quieter and more stabilizing. It does not rely on dramatic threats or doomsday scenarios. Instead, it relies on credible, visible capabilities that convince an adversary it simply cannot win, no matter how limited or controlled it tries to be. The strategic objective, then, is psychological as much as military. Strong denial defense seeks to shape adversary decision-making at the highest level. By demonstrating that aggression would be ineffective, prohibitively costly, and ultimately unwinnable, the Pentagon aims to narrow the range of options an opponent sees as viable. When leaders look at the map and realize that speed, surprise, and coercion no longer guarantee success, restraint becomes the rational choice. This is why the concept fits so seamlessly with the first island chain. Geography already constrains movement. Denial capabilities amplify those constraints. Together, they send a clear but understated message. The easiest war to avoid is the one that cannot be won in the first place. If the first island chain is the backbone of Indo-Pacific deterrence, then its geography is the muscle and nerve system that makes the strategy work. These are not just dots on a map. They are pressure points where global trade, military movement, and political resolve intersect. Control, access, and influence over these locations shape who moves freely in the Western Pacific and who does not. Japan sits at the northern anchor of the chain and remains its most heavily fortified node. U.S. bases across Honshu, Kyushu, and especially Okinawa are not Cold War relics. They are forward-positioned enablers of missile defense, air power, and maritime surveillance. The Ryukyu Islands stretch like a natural fence toward Taiwan, constraining naval maneuver space and giving Allied forces the ability to monitor and, if necessary, contest movement through critical sea lanes. From a strategic standpoint, Japan's geography turns proximity into leverage. Further south, the Taiwan Strait represents the most sensitive and consequential flashpoint along the entire chain. Taiwan itself is the geographic keystone. Its location alone influences the regional balance of power. Whoever can operate freely around Taiwan gains direct access to the Western Pacific. Whoever cannot remains strategically boxed in. This is why the strait is not merely a transit route, but a strategic fulcrum. Stability here determines whether the first island chain holds as a barrier or fractures under pressure. The Philippines and the Bashi Channel form the southern gateway of the chain, and their importance has surged in recent years. The Bashi Channel is one of the few deep-water passages connecting the Pacific Ocean to the South China Sea, making it indispensable for both commercial shipping and naval operations. Philippine territory, sitting astride this corridor, offers unmatched positional advantage for monitoring, deterrence, and rapid response. Access agreements and infrastructure development here quietly reshape operational realities without the drama of formal alliances. The strategic value of these nodes is ultimately about freedom of navigation in one of the busiest maritime corridors on Earth. Energy flows, container shipping, and critical supply chains pass through waters bordered by the first island chain every day. Japan's Ryukyu Islands and Taiwan in particular function as natural barriers that limit the outward expansion of rival naval forces, reinforcing denial by geography itself. In this environment, maps are not neutral, they are instruments of power. What makes the first island chain strategy credible is not rhetoric, but hardware, positioning, and repetition. Under the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, Washington has quietly poured more than $40 billion since 2021 into infrastructure hardening, dispersal, and forward capabilities across the Indo-Pacific. This is not about building giant Cold War-style bases. It is about making forces harder to find, harder to hit, and harder to neutralize in the opening hours of a crisis. The deployment of systems like the Typhoon mid-range missile platform and NMAC's anti-ship launchers across Japan and the Philippines reflects this shift. Mobile, survivable, and designed explicitly to deny maritime access rather than seek dominance far from home waters. Equally important is how these capabilities are woven together with allies. Exercises such as Balikatan 2025 involving roughly 9,000 US troops, 5,000 Filipino personnel, and Australian forces, are not symbolic rehearsals. They are operational stress tests for interoperability, command integration, and real-time coordination under contested conditions. Layered onto this is the rapid adoption of emerging technologies, long-range precision strike, cyber resilience, and AI-enabled intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Together, they form a distributed deterrence network that complicates adversary planning across every domain, not just at sea.
The Pentagon's message along the first island chain is subtle by design. This is not deterrence through spectacle, but deterrence through persuasion. Forward deployments, rotational forces, and routine exercises are calibrated to project resolve without triggering crisis dynamics. The emphasis is not on sudden surges, but on steady, predictable presence that normalizes preparedness rather than dramatizing it. This is where the silent signal becomes powerful. Each missile deployment, access agreement, and joint drill quietly reinforces the same conclusion. The region is not undefended, alliances are not hollow, and coercion will be contested from day one. For adversaries, the psychological effect is cumulative. For partners, it is reassuring. The signal is clear without being provocative. Capability is in place, coordination is real, and escalation is neither necessary nor attractive.
For China, the first island chain remains a strategic constraint that shapes every major contingency plan. Beijing's heavy investment in anti-access and area denial capabilities is itself an admission of how seriously this barrier is taken. The chain complicates power projection, stretches logistics, and undermines assumptions about rapid, decisive operations in the near seas. In short, it forces harder choices and longer timelines, both enemies of coercive strategy. Beyond China, the regional picture is more complex. North Korea's nuclear and missile programs still influence force posture decisions, but increasingly as a secondary consideration rather than the organizing principle of U.S. strategy. The broader effect of the first island chain is alliance deepening. Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and other partners are no longer peripheral contributors. They are integrated nodes in a collective deterrence architecture that distributes both risk and responsibility.
Security along the first island chain is inseparable from economics. The same waters that host naval patrols also carry energy shipments, container traffic, and the arteries of the global semiconductor supply chain. Any instability here would not stay regional. It would cascade into inflation, supply shocks, and industrial disruption worldwide. This is why deterrence in the Western Pacific is as much about economic stability as military balance. Diplomatically, the strategy walks a careful line. Military deterrence is paired with constant engagement, nudging allies toward higher defense spending, greater interoperability, and shared strategic assumptions. Multilateral frameworks such as ASEAN, the Quad, and AUKUS draw much of their practical relevance from this underlying security logic, reinforcing norms of open seas and resistance to coercion without forcing states into binary choices.
Still, the approach is not without strain. Sustaining a robust, dispersed posture across a vast maritime theater taxes logistics, budgets, and personnel. High visibility deployments and frequent exercises also carry the risk of miscalculation, particularly in an environment where every movement is scrutinized and sometimes misread. Critics argue that the strategy risks overextension, locking the United States into commitments that may be difficult to sustain politically or financially over the long term. There is also an ongoing debate about balance. Some warn that an emphasis on military denial could crowd out diplomatic creativity, reducing space for conflict management mechanisms. The challenge is not whether deterrence is necessary, it is how to keep it stabilizing rather than self-reinforcing.
Taken as a whole, the first island chain strategy represents a mature evolution in deterrence thinking. It blends geography, technology, and alliances into a posture designed not to win wars, but to prevent them by making aggression untenable. Denial capabilities, integrated with credible partnerships, form the quiet scaffolding of regional stability. Looking ahead, success will depend on adaptation. Hybrid threats, asymmetric tactics, and rapid technological change will test the resilience of this approach. Yet the long-term importance is unmistakable. Sustaining the first island chain is not just about U.S. power projection. It is about preserving an Indo-Pacific order where no single actor can dominate by force, and where readiness and restraint coexist. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion.
China is accelerating its nuclear buildup at a pace that is also reshaping the global balance of power, it seems.
It is the first time that China has so clearly stated its military plans and ambitions in the last 2 years, and it is focusing its attention far at sea, far from its shore.
I mean, China has grown the islands to 2,000 acres in the last 18 months. That's a lot of space that they've grown. They're throwing sand up into these atolls and then building military airstrips on top of those.
What if the next major global crisis doesn't begin with a missile launch, but with concrete being poured onto tiny reefs in the middle of the sea? That question suddenly feels a lot less hypothetical this week. Fresh satellite images and defense assessments show that China is steadily expanding military infrastructure across several artificial islands in the South China Sea, facilities analysts say could support advanced missile systems and potentially nuclear-capable strategic assets. For most people scrolling through the news, it might sound like just another geopolitical headline. But look a little closer, and it feels different. Bigger, almost like watching pieces of a much larger chessboard quietly fall into place. And here's the unsettling part. The South China Sea doesn't look dramatic on a map. Just scattered reefs, shallow waters, and a few tiny specks of land. Yet every year, roughly $3.37 trillion worth of global trade moves through these waters. Oil tankers, cargo ships, energy routes, an entire artery of the global economy flows through this stretch of ocean. If something goes wrong here, it doesn't stay regional for long. It ripples outward, touching supply chains, energy markets, and even grocery prices on the other side of the planet. Take Mischief Reef, for example. A decade ago, it was little more than a submerged coral formation. Fishermen passed by it without thinking twice. Today, it has long airstrips, hardened shelters, radar systems, and missile-capable facilities. The transformation is so dramatic that one Southeast Asian naval officer once joked privately that a reef turned into an aircraft carrier. Except, it wasn't really a joke. This is where the tension begins to feel personal for the region. China's sweeping claim to most of the South China Sea, marked by the now famous 9-dash line, overlaps directly with the maritime zones of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. For fishermen, coast guards, and naval patrols operating there, the dispute isn't theoretical. It's something they encounter face-to-face on the water, sometimes intense standoffs, sometimes with water cannons, warning shots, or aggressive maneuvering between vessels. Meanwhile, outside powers are stepping in more frequently. The United States and its partners regularly conduct freedom of navigation operations, sailing warships through contested waters to challenge what they see as excessive maritime claims. Every patrol, every flyover, every radar lock adds another layer of friction to an already crowded strategic space. As Admiral John Aquilino, the commander of United States Indo-Pacific Command, once put it bluntly, the South China Sea is not just a regional issue. It's a global concern with implications for freedom of navigation and international law. And that's really the heart of the story. Because what's unfolding in the South China Sea isn't simply about islands or even military bases. It's about who sets the rules in one of the world's most important waterways. It's about whether international law still holds weight when major powers disagree. And increasingly, it's about whether a quiet competition for strategic dominance might one day turn into something much harder to contain. So the real question isn't just what China is building in the South China Sea. The bigger question is what it might be preparing for and how the rest of the region and the world will respond. The South China Sea sits at the crossroads of geography, commerce, and power. On the map, it may appear like a wide stretch of blue connecting Southeast Asia to the Pacific. But in reality, it functions as one of the world's most important maritime highways. Every day, enormous container ships and oil tankers move through these waters, linking the factories of East Asia with the markets of Europe and the energy producers of the Middle East. It is difficult to exaggerate how vital this route has become to the global economy. Entire supply chains depend on it. A disruption here would not just affect nearby countries, it would echo across global markets almost immediately. But trade routes are only one part of the story. Beneath the seabed of the South China Sea lies another powerful incentive that keeps regional tensions simmering: natural resources. Energy assessments suggest that the seabed may contain around 11 billion barrels of oil and nearly 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. For countries with fast-growing economies and rising energy demands, those numbers are hard to ignore. Control over even a portion of these resources could reshape national energy strategies and reduce dependence on foreign imports. In many ways, the sea is not just a waterway, it is also a potential energy reserve waiting beneath layers of sediment. Then there is the human dimension, which often gets overlooked in high-level strategic debates. The South China Sea is one of the most productive fishing grounds on Earth, supplying roughly 10 to 12% of the global fish catch. Millions of people across Southeast Asia depend on these waters for their livelihoods. For coastal communities in places like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, fishing here is not about geopolitics, it is about daily survival. Yet fishermen often find themselves on the front lines of maritime disputes, encountering foreign coast guards, maritime militias, or naval patrols in increasingly crowded waters. The roots of the territorial dispute stretch back decades. China's sweeping claim over most of the South China Sea is illustrated through the so-called Nine-Dash Line, a boundary that first appeared on Chinese maps in the late 1940s. Beijing argues that this line reflects historical rights and centuries of Chinese activity in the region. However, several Southeast Asian countries strongly reject that interpretation. Instead, they base their claims on modern international maritime law, particularly the framework established under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which defines exclusive economic zones extending 200 nautical miles from coastal states.
The new government here in Manila is grappling with what might be called catastrophic success. What comes next is obviously going to be a delicate balancing act. It is a time for cool heads.
The legal clash between historical claims and international law came to a dramatic moment in 2016. That year, an international tribunal under the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines in a case challenging China's maritime claims. The decision concluded that the Nine-Dash Line had no legal basis under international law, and that many of the disputed features could not generate expansive maritime zones. Beijing, however, rejected the ruling outright and has continued to assert its position, creating a situation where legal interpretation and geopolitical reality remain deeply at odds. While legal debates continue, developments on the ground, or more precisely, on the water, have moved forward rapidly. Over the past decade, China has carried out extensive land reclamation projects across several reefs and shoals in both the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands. What were once scattered coral outcrops have been transformed into large artificial islands with runways long enough for military aircraft, deep water ports capable of hosting naval vessels, and sophisticated radar installations. These facilities are not merely symbolic outposts, they represent a permanent and expanding military footprint in the region. Alongside the infrastructure has come a steady deployment of military assets. Fighter jets, surface-to-air missile systems, and naval patrol vessels have been observed operating from several of these installations. From a strategic perspective, these bases extend China's surveillance and operational reach across much of the South China Sea. If you zoom in on recent satellite imagery of the South China Sea, something striking appears. Reefs that once barely broke the surface of the water now look like small military cities. Concrete runways stretch across artificial islands. Radar towers stand like watchful sentries. And deep water harbors are carved into places that not long ago were just coral formations surrounded by fishermen's boats. Over the past few years, China has quietly but steadily expanded these installations, turning them into some of the most strategically positioned military outposts in the region. Two of the most significant locations are Fiery Cross Reef and Subi Reef. What used to be isolated reefs have been transformed into heavily fortified bases with long airstrips, hardened shelters, and large infrastructure capable of supporting sustained military operations. Analysts studying satellite imagery say some of the newly reinforced structures appear designed to store or deploy advanced missile systems, including platforms capable of carrying nuclear-capable intermediate-range missiles. In several images released in recent years, thick concrete facilities and underground-style structures suggest preparations for assets that require both protection and rapid launch capability. The expansion has not been limited to building new bases. China has also been upgrading facilities that were already operational. Runways have been extended and strengthened so they can accommodate larger aircraft, while port facilities have been expanded to handle bigger warships. The effect is noticeable when you look at the scale of these installations today. They are no longer simple forward outposts, but rather fully functioning military hubs. Surveillance technology has also become a central feature of these bases. Advanced radar systems, high-altitude drones, and increasingly sophisticated monitoring tools now allow Chinese forces to observe vast portions of the surrounding sea and airspace. A particularly important node in this surveillance network is the growing military complex on Hainan Island. Located at the northern edge of the South China Sea, the island has long served as a key base for China's naval and air forces. Recent upgrades have added powerful radar installations capable of scanning hundreds of kilometers across the region. In practical terms, that means aircraft movements, naval patrols, and even routine shipping activity can be tracked with far greater precision than before. For strategists, that kind of visibility dramatically strengthens situational awareness in contested waters. Alongside infrastructure expansion has come a clear push to strengthen naval and air capabilities operating in the area. China has deployed increasingly advanced platforms, including the Type 093 submarine, which enhances underwater deterrence and patrol capacity. Surface operations have also grown more prominent with the presence of the aircraft carrier Shandong, capable of projecting air power far from the mainland. In the skies above the region, China's fifth-generation Chengdu J-20 fighter jets represent another step toward modernizing the country's military reach. Military activity itself has also intensified. Exercises in the region have become more frequent and more complex, often involving coordinated naval and air maneuvers. Some drills reportedly simulate scenarios involving potential confrontation with outside powers, particularly the United States, whose naval forces regularly operate in nearby waters. These exercises serve multiple purposes. They train Chinese forces for high-intensity operations, signal strategic resolve to rivals, and demonstrate China's growing ability to project power across one of the world's most contested maritime regions. Taken together, these developments suggest something larger than routine military modernization. They point to a deliberate effort to build a network of forward positions capable of monitoring, controlling, and if necessary, defending China's interests across the South China Sea. For countries in the region, and for global powers watching closely, the question is no longer whether China is strengthening its presence there. The real debate now centers on how far that expansion might go, and what it could mean for the balance of power in Asia's most strategically sensitive waters. When you step back and look at the scale of China's construction across the South China Sea, it's hard not to ask the obvious question: why invest so much in remote reefs and contested waters? The answer isn't just about territory. It's about influence, security, and the long game of global power. For Beijing, these islands are not random military outposts, they are strategic footholds in one of the most important maritime regions on Earth. One of the clearest motivations is regional power projection. The South China Sea has increasingly become a stage where major powers signal strength and resolve. For China, expanding military facilities there allows it to extend its defensive perimeter far beyond the mainland coastline. From Beijing's perspective, this helps counterbalance the presence of foreign naval forces that regularly operate in the region. Warships from the United States and its allies conduct patrols meant to challenge expansive maritime claims, and Chinese strategists see forward bases as a way to maintain constant visibility and, if necessary, deterrence against those movements. At the same time, these installations reinforce China's territorial claims. The scattered reefs and islands of the South China Sea may appear insignificant individually, but collectively they shape control over vast surrounding waters. Another powerful driver is economic security. China is the world's largest energy importer, and much of that energy flows through the sea lanes that cut across the South China Sea. Tankers carrying crude oil from the Middle East and Africa travel along these routes before reaching Chinese ports. Analysts often note that roughly 70% of China's imported oil passes through these waters, making them one of the country's most critical supply arteries. From Beijing's standpoint, ensuring that these shipping lanes remain secure, especially during geopolitical crises, is a matter of national survival. Beneath the sea itself lies yet another strategic prize. Geological surveys suggest that the seabed may hold substantial deposits of oil, natural gas, and potentially rare earth minerals. Control over these resources would strengthen China's long-term energy security while reducing vulnerability to external suppliers. In an era where energy access often shapes geopolitical competition, the prospect of untapped reserves beneath the South China Sea adds another layer of strategic urgency to the dispute. Domestic politics also plays a role in shaping China's approach. The leadership of the Chinese Communist Party places strong emphasis on national unity, sovereignty, and the idea of restoring China's historical status as a major power. Demonstrating control over disputed maritime territories fits naturally into that narrative. Military modernization, visible through advanced aircraft, naval deployments, and fortified island bases, reinforces the image of a country that has regained both confidence and capability on the global stage. For Chinese leadership, a stronger military presence in the region also serves as a message to domestic audiences. It signals that the government is actively protecting national interests and responding to external pressures. In that sense, infrastructure projects in distant reefs become symbols of national strength as much as they are strategic assets. This connection between military strength and national development has been openly emphasized by Xi Jinping, who has repeatedly linked defense modernization with China's broader rise as a global power. As he stated in 2019, a strong military underpins China's peaceful rise. The remark captures a central idea in Beijing's strategic thinking. Stability and prosperity, in China's view, depend on the ability to defend national interests with credible power. Seen through that lens, the expansion in the South China Sea is not an isolated policy. It is part of a broader strategy aimed at securing vital trade routes, reinforcing territorial claims, and projecting influence across the Indo-Pacific. Whether this approach will stabilize the region or deepen strategic rivalry, however, remains one of the most pressing questions shaping the future of Asian security. As China's military footprint across the South China Sea has expanded, reactions from the rest of the region have been immediate and sometimes uneasy. Countries in Southeast Asia are watching developments closely because the dispute isn't happening somewhere far away. It's unfolding right on their maritime doorstep. For several members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the growing presence of Chinese bases has triggered a mix of diplomatic protest, cautious dialogue, and quiet military preparation. Governments across the region have repeatedly called for negotiations and adherence to international maritime law. Yet behind the scenes, many are also strengthening their own security capabilities. Vietnam, for instance, has steadily expanded and modernized its Coast Guard and naval patrol capacity, aiming to better monitor its maritime zones. The Philippines has taken a slightly different route by deepening defense cooperation with the United States, allowing greater coordination between the two militaries in response to growing tensions in disputed waters. For smaller states, the challenge is delicate. They must defend their maritime rights while avoiding escalation with a far more powerful neighbor. Outside powers have also become increasingly involved. The United States, which sees the South China Sea as vital to global maritime freedom, continues to conduct freedom of navigation operations to challenge what it considers excessive territorial claims. American naval deployments in the region often operate alongside partners such as Japan and Australia, signaling that the issue is no longer purely regional, but part of a broader Indo-Pacific security landscape. One notable example came in 2023, when the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan sailed through the South China Sea as part of a broader show of deterrence and reassurance to allies. These patrols and exercises increasingly intersect with emerging security frameworks like the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, commonly known as the Quad, which brings together the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. Although the Quad is not a formal military alliance, its growing cooperation in maritime security reflects a shared concern about maintaining open sea lanes and balancing China's expanding influence. At the legal level, international institutions have attempted to provide a framework for managing these disputes. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea remains the primary legal basis for defining maritime rights and exclusive economic zones. In theory, it offers a clear structure for resolving overlapping claims. In practice, however, enforcement remains difficult when major powers reject rulings or interpret legal provisions differently. As international law expert Philippe Sands once observed, international law is clear, but compliance remains a challenge. His remark captures the frustrating gap between legal principles and geopolitical realities. The developments unfolding in the South China Sea illustrate how geography, economics, and power politics can intersect in ways that shape global security. China's expanding military presence, including infrastructure capable of supporting advanced missile systems, reflects a strategy driven by regional influence, protection of vital trade routes, and domestic political considerations. For neighboring states and global powers alike, the implications are far-reaching. Security dynamics are shifting, economic stability is potentially at stake, and diplomatic relationships across the Indo-Pacific are being recalibrated in response to these changes. None of these developments exist in isolation. Each is part of a larger strategic transformation underway in the region. For now, the South China Sea remains one of the defining geopolitical hotspots of the 21st century. What happens there will not only influence the security architecture of Asia, but also shape the broader dynamics of global power in the decades ahead. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion. What happens when the world's busiest trade highway turns into a naval chessboard? That's the question hanging heavy over Asia right now. In the latest jolt of breaking news, Chinese warships and Coast Guard vessels have surged back into contested waters of the South China Sea, shadowing U.S. naval activity and circling flashpoints like Scarborough Shoal. One regional security official summed it up bluntly: "This is no longer signaling, this is positioning." And suddenly, Manila is on high alert, allies are dialing each other up, and the calm blue waters are starting to look dangerously crowded. Picture this for a second: a stretch of sea carrying nearly $3 trillion in global trade every year, now packed with destroyers, patrol ships, and combat aircraft flying too close for comfort. This isn't some distant maritime dispute. It's the route your fuel, food, electronics, and energy supplies travel through. Scarborough Shoal, just a short sail from the Philippine coast, has once again become ground zero, with China flexing power and the Philippines responding by tightening coordination with the United States and regional partners. One wrong move here doesn't just make headlines, it rewrites security equations. And that's why this moment hits different. This isn't about one patrol or one provocation, it's about who controls the rules of the sea. Beijing's deployments challenge freedom of navigation, test international law, and directly push back against U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific. For the Philippines, it's an uncomfortable reminder that sovereignty isn't abstract. It's defended in real time, under real pressure. The South China Sea is no longer simmering in the background. It's boiling, and the world is watching to see who blinks first. All right, let's set the stage properly because none of this is random, and none of it started yesterday. The South China Sea has been contested for decades, long before today's headlines and warship movements. China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan all lay overlapping claims to islands, reefs, and waters in this strategically priceless maritime zone. On paper, many of these claims are supposed to be governed by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which defines territorial waters, exclusive economic zones, and maritime rights. In reality, power politics often outweigh legal diagrams. What should be clear-cut lines on a map have turned into gray zones patrolled by coast guards, naval vessels, and surveillance aircraft.
What you see on the screen is a depiction of the South China Sea, and you see the red dashes around the perimeter of the South China Sea.
The tension exploded into legal warfare in 2016 when an international arbitral tribunal in The Hague delivered a landmark ruling in favor of the Philippines. The court decisively struck down China's sweeping 9-line claim, declaring it had no legal basis under UNCLOS. For Manila, the verdict was a diplomatic weapon, proof that international law was on its side. For Beijing, it was a red line. China rejected the ruling outright, calling it null and void, and has since acted as if it never existed. That legal standoff still defines today's confrontations. The Philippines cites the ruling in protests and speeches, while Chinese ships continue operating as if the map never changed. Layered on top of this is the constant presence of the United States Navy, which views the South China Sea not as a regional dispute, but as a global test case. Through regular freedom of navigation operations (FNOP), U.S. warships deliberately sail near contested features, including recent patrols close to Scarborough Shoal, to challenge what Washington calls excessive maritime claims. The message is old school but crystal clear: the seas stay open, no matter who tries to fence them off. As U.S. officials put it, these missions defend the right to fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. And every time an American ship shows up, Chinese vessels shadow it, turning the South China Sea into a high-stakes standoff where law, history, and raw power collide. Now here's where things get real, because this isn't just talk anymore, it's steel in the water and aircraft in the sky. Over the past few days, China has rolled out serious naval and air power into waters claimed by the Philippines. And the composition of these forces matters. Guided missile destroyers and frigates, not symbolic patrol boats, have been tracked operating close to sensitive areas, signaling high-end combat readiness rather than routine law enforcement presence. These platforms are built for air defense, anti-ship warfare, and long-range operations, meaning this deployment is designed to be seen, noted, and calculated by everyone watching the radar screens. Even more eye-catching is the aerial component. China has flown H-6 strategic bombers, aircraft capable of carrying YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles with an estimated strike range of up to 500 kilometers. That's not defensive posturing, that's a clear reminder of reach. From those distances, major naval formations, ports, and sea lanes fall well within potential engagement zones. In simple terms, Beijing is quietly saying, we can hit far, and we can hit fast. Officially, China's Southern Theater Command is playing it cool. The patrols are described as routine, while Manila is accused of colluding with external forces, diplomatic shorthand for working too closely with the United States and its allies. According to Beijing, these deployments are meant to preserve peace and stability. It's a familiar script: assert dominance, deny escalation, blame the other side. Old playbook, new hardware. At the core, China's stated objective remains unchanged. Beijing insists it is defending territorial sovereignty and responding to what it calls provocations by rival claimants and outside powers meddling in regional affairs. But the scale and sophistication of the forces involved tell a deeper story. This isn't just about protecting claims. It's about shaping behavior, intimidating opponents, and setting red lines in real time. In the South China Sea, China isn't asking for attention anymore. It's commanding it. Washington didn't waste time responding, and it responded the way it always has, by showing up, staying visible, and refusing to blink. The U.S. Navy has surged Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers alongside littoral combat ships into waters near disputed shoals, reinforcing what officials call a persistent presence in the South China Sea. These aren't ceremonial sail-bys. Arleigh Burkes are among the most capable surface combatants afloat, packed with Aegis air defense systems, cruise missiles, and anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Their deployment sends a quiet but unmistakable signal. The U.S. is prepared to operate in contested waters and stay there. At the heart of this posture is freedom of navigation operations, a doctrine Washington treats almost like sacred tradition. U.S. officials stress that these operations are fully consistent with international law and not aimed at any single country, even if everyone knows who's being challenged. One Pentagon spokesperson cut straight through the noise, stating that China's maritime claims do not deter us. In plain terms, the message is simple and old school. No nation gets to rewrite the rules of the sea by force. But beneath the tough talk lies a very real danger. The South China Sea has already seen near misses, aggressive shadowing, and even collisions between Chinese vessels during high-speed maneuvers. Add American warships, Chinese destroyers, bombers overhead, and Coast Guard vessels weaving between them, and the margin for error shrinks fast. A misjudged turn, a misread radar contact, or an overly aggressive intercept could trigger a crisis no one actually planned for. That's the uncomfortable truth of the current U.S. posture. Deterrence keeps the peace until it doesn't. And in these crowded waters, where pride, power, and patrol routes collide, escalation doesn't need intent. It only needs one bad moment. For Manila, this isn't theory or great power abstraction. This is happening right off its coast, and the response has been sharp, public, and deliberate. The Philippine government has moved quickly on the diplomatic front, issuing official protests and lodging firm representations with the Chinese embassy over both Beijing's rhetoric and its expanding maritime presence. Philippine officials have pushed back hard against accusations of collusion, stressing that defending sovereign rights is not provocation. In statements from Malacanang and the Department of Foreign Affairs, the message is consistent. China's actions are being challenged on record, in writing, and through international channels. No quiet acceptance, no silent retreat. At sea, the posture has tightened. The Philippine Navy and Philippine Coast Guard have stepped up patrols across the West Philippine Sea, keeping a closer watch on contested areas and maintaining presence near sensitive features. While Manila knows it cannot match China ship for ship, visibility itself has become a form of resistance. Each patrol shows the same point: these waters are not abandoned, and sovereignty isn't surrendered just because the other side is bigger. Diplomatically, the Philippines is also playing the long game. Coordination with the United States remains central, especially through joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and operational planning under existing defense agreements. At the same time, Manila continues engaging ASEAN partners, pushing for unity, consultations, and a rules-based approach to maritime security. It's a careful balancing act, strengthening alliances without triggering outright escalation. The Philippine response is quiet but firm, cautious but unmistakable. Manila isn't pounding the table, but it isn't backing down either. In a region where silence can be mistaken for consent, the Philippines is making one thing clear: it's present, it's watching, and it intends to stand its ground. What's unfolding in the South China Sea doesn't stay neatly boxed inside national borders, it ripples across the entire region. For ASEAN, these tensions are a stress test of unity. Some member states are deeply uneasy about being dragged into a confrontation between major powers, preferring quiet diplomacy and strategic ambiguity. Others, especially claimant states, are increasingly vocal about the need to push back against coercive behavior before it becomes the new normal. The result is a familiar Asian dilemma: consensus versus credibility. Every flare-up exposes how hard it is to speak with one voice when national interests, threat perceptions, and economic ties to China all pull in different directions. The economic stakes raise the temperature even further. The South China Sea isn't just geopolitically sensitive, it's economically indispensable. These waters carry critical shipping lanes and energy routes that feed East Asian manufacturing hubs, fuel markets, and consumer supply chains. Any serious disruption, whether from military standoffs or heightened insurance risks, would ripple straight into ports, prices, and production lines. For economies built on just-in-time trade, even short-term instability can translate into long-term uncertainty. Then there's the most immediate danger: maritime safety. The sea is getting crowded, and not just with warships. Military vessels, Coast Guard cutters, and maritime militia are operating in close quarters, often at high speed and under political pressure. Each aggressive maneuver, each shadowing incident, raises the odds of an accident, and in this environment, accidents don't stay accidents for long. One collision, one misread intention, and the region could find itself in an escalatory spiral no one planned for, but everyone would have to deal with. In short, the South China Sea is becoming more than a dispute zone, it's a regional fault line. And the longer tensions simmer, the harder it becomes for Asian, markets, and mariners alike to pretend this is business as usual. At the core of all this naval muscle flexing is a much quieter battlefield, international law, and that fight may be the most consequential of all. The legal backbone of the South China Sea disputes is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Under UNCLOS, coastal states are granted clearly defined maritime entitlements, including territorial seas and exclusive economic zones extending up to 200 nautical miles. This framework is what anchors the Philippines' legal position in the West Philippine Sea. Manila argues that its claims aren't based on power or history, but on codified international law that most of the world recognizes and follows. In theory, UNCLOS is supposed to remove ambiguity. In practice, It's become the very thing being contested. China, however, plays by a different script. Beijing asserts historical rights that it argues predate UNCLOS and justify its extensive presence and deployments across much of the South China Sea. This interpretation has been widely challenged, especially after the 2016 arbitral ruling, but China continues to treat these claims as non-negotiable. From Beijing's perspective, patrols, exercises, and ship deployments are not violations. They are enforcement of long-held sovereignty. Law, in this view, bends to history and power. The United States cuts straight across that argument. Washington insists that freedom of navigation and overflight are protected under UNCLOS norms and customary international law, regardless of competing sovereignty claims. That's the legal logic behind U.S. freedom of navigation operations. They are not about ownership of reefs or shoals, but about preventing any single state from turning international waters into restricted zones. Every FONOP is a legal statement made with a warship. And that's the real tension. One side sees law as fixed rules, the other treats it as flexible history. Until those visions align or one clearly prevails, the South China Sea will remain not just a military standoff, but a legal one, fought ship by ship, patrol by patrol. When you strip away the press statements and naval posturing, what's left is a tense strategic equation, and none of the outcomes are guaranteed to stay tidy. One possible path is de-escalation, driven by sustained diplomacy, military hotlines, and confidence-building measures. This is the scenario everyone publicly claims to want: fewer risky maneuvers, clearer communication, and a return to managed competition. But let's be real, de-escalation in the South China Sea doesn't mean ships go home. It means tensions are contained, not resolved, and restraint becomes a daily operational choice rather than a permanent fix. The more likely near-term scenario is a prolonged standoff. Persistent patrols, shadowing operations, and shows of force continue, but without major incidents. Friction becomes normalized. Each side learns the other's habits, thresholds, and red lines. This kind of frozen confrontation feels stable on the surface, but it's exhausting, expensive, and inherently fragile. One political crisis elsewhere or one aggressive captain at sea can shatter the balance overnight. The most dangerous scenario is escalation, and the scary part is that it wouldn't have to be intentional. An unintended collision, an aircraft intercept gone wrong, or a misinterpreted radar lock could trigger rapid military responses before diplomacy has time to catch up. In an environment thick with nationalism and alliance commitments, even a minor incident can spiral faster than leaders can control. Complicating all of this is the accelerating technological edge. Advanced missile platforms, long-range strike systems, real-time surveillance drones, and networked sensors are compressing decision-making timelines. Commanders now see more, track faster, and react quicker, which sounds stabilizing, until it isn't. Speed reduces room for human judgment, and in contested waters, that can turn seconds into strategic consequences. Bottom line, the South China Sea isn't drifting toward resolution, it's hardening into a test of endurance, discipline, and crisis management. The danger isn't war by design, it's war by miscalculation, and history tells us that's often how the worst ones start. Zoom out for a second, and it's obvious the South China Sea isn't just about reefs and shoals anymore, it's a front line in the US. China strategic rivalry. Every patrol, every statement, every joint exercise feeds into a much larger contest over influence, credibility, and leadership in the Indo-Pacific. For Washington, presence equals commitment to allies, to international law, to an open maritime order. For Beijing, pushing back is about reshaping that order and proving it can no longer be dictated from outside the region. The result? Alliances are tightening, defense cooperation is deepening, and neutral ground is getting harder to find. Multilateral diplomacy is supposed to be the pressure valve, but progress has been painfully slow. UN platforms and related mechanisms offer space for dialogue, confidence building, and rule setting. Yet consensus remains elusive. competing interests, economic dependencies, and strategic caution keep outcomes watered down. The long-discussed code of conduct in the South China Sea, for example, moves forward inch by inch, always discussed, never quite delivered. Still, these forums matter. In a crisis-prone environment, even slow diplomacy is better than silence. That's why dialogue, however imperfect, remains essential. Military deterrence may prevent immediate conflict, but only sustained diplomatic engagement and respect for international norms can prevent long-term instability. Hotlines, maritime communication protocols, and regular consultations don't solve sovereignty disputes, but they can stop misunderstandings from turning into flashpoints. In a region this tense, talking is not weakness, it's damage control. What we're witnessing now is a clear escalation in geopolitical intensity. China's expanded naval deployments, the United States' firm maritime posture, and the Philippines' heightened state of alert all point to a South China Sea that is more contested, more crowded, and more consequential than ever. This isn't a temporary spike, it's a new normal taking shape in real time. The risks are obvious and serious. Military operations intersect with strategic rivalry and unresolved legal claims, creating a volatile mix where miscalculation could carry regional, even global consequences. Trade routes, energy flows, alliance credibility, and international law are all on the line. When great power competition plays out at sea, the margin for error is dangerously thin. The path forward is narrow but clear. Stronger diplomacy, greater transparency, and consistent adherence to lawful maritime conduct are no longer optional. They're essential. The South China Sea has always been a crossroads of commerce and culture. Whether it becomes a corridor of cooperation or a theater of confrontation depends on the choices being made right now, while the ships are still maneuvering and the lines are not yet crossed.
Get out there!
What does it mean when a state stops calling harassment harassment and starts calling it piracy? That single word choice, loaded with centuries of legal, moral, and strategic weight, is what made the latest confrontation at 2nd Thomas Shoal fundamentally different from the dozens of incidents that preceded it. When the Philippines publicly accused China of piracy following a violent encounter in the South China Sea, it was not merely describing an event at sea. It was signaling a shift in narrative, posture, and possibly escalation thresholds. The incident itself followed a now familiar pattern. Philippine vessels conducting a resupply mission to 2nd Thomas Shoal were confronted by Chinese maritime forces employing aggressive maneuvering, boarding actions, and the seizure of equipment. Such encounters have occurred repeatedly in recent years. What changed was Manila's framing. By invoking piracy, a term rooted in international law and historically associated with criminal violence beyond state authority, the Philippines implicitly challenged Beijing's attempt to normalize coercion under the guise of law enforcement and sovereignty patrols. This rhetorical escalation matters because language shapes legitimacy. Most Southeast Asian states facing pressure from China have relied on calibrated, cautious phrasing. Unsafe maneuvers, incidents, or miscalculations. Vietnam has protested. Malaysia has quietly reinforced. Indonesia has renamed waters and strengthened patrols, all while avoiding labels that could legally or diplomatically harden positions. By contrast, the Philippines has increasingly chosen clarity over ambiguity. Calling an act piracy reframes the encounter from a bilateral dispute into a question of international order, rules at sea, and collective response.
Strategically, the episode fits squarely within China's established pattern of gray zone maritime coercion. The deliberate use of Coast Guard, maritime militia, and quasi-civilian assets to apply force without crossing the threshold of declared armed conflict. What makes this case distinct is how it intersects with alliance dynamics.
Our mutual defense treaty is the bedrock of that. We share concerns about China's coercion in the South China Sea.
Unlike many regional states, the Philippines operates under a formal mutual defense treaty with the United States, conducts regular joint patrols, and has openly aligned its maritime posture with broader Indo-Pacific deterrence efforts. The piracy accusation, therefore, resonates far beyond the reef itself, raising questions about precedent, escalation control, and how far coercion can go before it triggers collective security mechanisms. In that sense, Second Thomas Shoal is no longer just a rusting ship on a submerged reef. It has become a test case of narrative power, of legal framing, and of whether sustained gray zone pressure can still hide behind technicalities when the language of international crime enters the conversation.
At the heart of the latest South China Sea confrontation lies Second Thomas Shoal, also called Ayungin Shoal by the Philippines. A low-lying reef roughly 105 nautical miles west of Palawan that sits well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, EEZ, as defined under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tayo.
Manila has maintained a permanent presence there since 1999 by grounding the aging transport BRP Sierra Madre to reinforce its territorial claim, a symbolic fixture of sovereignty that China continues to contest.
It was a roaring mission to BRP Sierra Madre. No untoward incident. There were 4 Coast Guard ships of China that were spotted, but they did not do any coercive nor aggressive actions.
On June 17, 2024, a routine rotation and reprovisioning RORE mission by the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, to deliver food, water, and other supplies to personnel aboard Sierra Madre devolved into violence when Chinese Coast Guard vessels aggressively intervened. According to the Philippines, Chinese personnel boarded at least one Philippine boat using cutlasses, spears, and knives, forcing Filipino sailors to defend themselves without firearms, per operational orders.
Tropa natin yan.
Manila reports that 8 Filipino personnel were wounded during the clash, including one sailor who lost his right thumb amid the melee. Philippine military leadership did not mince words.
The Coast Guard ang nag-rescue sa ating mga wounded personnel. Sila rin nagbigay ng first aid.
AFP Chief General Romeo Bronner Jr. publicly characterized the episode as akin to piracy, stating that Chinese personnel had seized 7 rifles still boxed for delivery and damaged communications and navigational equipment on the Filipino vessels. In a formal demand to Beijing, Manila later insisted on 60 million Filipino pesos in compensation for the equipment loss and the injuries sustained by Seaman First Class Jeffrey Facundo, whose medical care for the severed digit was part of the total cost estimate. From Manila's perspective, the weapons involved were not firearms, but bladed or improvised handheld implements used by Chinese forces during boarding, showing the irregular and brazen nature of the clash that triggered Manila's piracy label. Beijing, however, offered a sharply different account, rejecting Manila's narrative as distorted and insisting that Chinese actions were reasonable, lawful, professional, and restrained, even as its Coast Guard continued patrols in contested areas. In the immediate aftermath, the Philippine Coast Guard and Navy bolstered their presence around Second Thomas Shoal, deploying additional vessels and conducting more frequent patrols to deter further interference. Moves the AFP described as necessary to uphold navigation rights and protect Filipino personnel operating in waters Manila considers sovereign.
Unidentified foreign vessel at Sabina Shoal. This is Philippine Coast Guard. We are Picabra MRRV 4409.
This incident did not occur in isolation. It fits into a broader pattern of maritime confrontations between the two countries, ranging from water cannon engagements against Filipino fishing boats in December 2025 to repeated blocking and collision incidents near Scarborough Shoal and other contested features of the South China Sea.
To understand why tensions keep boiling over at Second Thomas Shoal, you have to stop thinking of it as just a reef on a map. It sits inside the Spratly Islands, one of the most hotly contested island systems in the world, and just a short distance from major sea lanes that carry trillions of dollars in trade through the South China Sea every year. Control here is not symbolic. It shapes who watches, who moves, and who decides what is normal at sea. For the Philippines, the shoal is deeply personal. Since 1999, Manila has maintained a constant presence through the grounded BRP Sierra Madre, a rusting World War II-era vessel deliberately run aground and turned into a living outpost. Filipino Marines rotate through harsh conditions, relying on periodic resupply missions for food, water, and medicine. Every successful run is quiet proof that the Philippines is still there. Every blocked mission feels like a test of resolve. That is where the pattern begins. Time after time, Chinese vessels have attempted to block, shadow, or physically disrupt Philippine resupply efforts. These are rarely dramatic naval battles. Instead, they unfold as tense standoffs at close range, ships cutting across bows, engines throttling forward, horns blaring, crews shouting across decks. The objective is not to sink a ship, but to exhaust, intimidate, and normalize interference without firing a shot.
Sa ngayon, nagbuga na naman ng tubig ang water cannon.
Since 2021, the Philippine Coast Guard has done something unusual in maritime disputes. It has turned cameras outward. Video after video released by the PCG shows Chinese vessels using water cannons, executing dangerous close-quarter maneuvers, and deliberately obstructing Philippine boats on humanitarian and military resupply missions. These clips matter because they strip away abstraction. You see sailors knocked off balance by high-pressure water jets. You hear engines straining as hulls pass within meters of collision. It is pressure made visible.
Hey! Stop! Hey! Stop! 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 Get out there!
What makes Second Thomas Shoal different from other disputed features is repetition. This is not a one-off crisis that fades from headlines. It is a cycle. Resupply planned, interference anticipated, confrontation likely. Each encounter builds on the last, slowly raising stakes while testing how much friction can be applied before something snaps. Over time, the shoal has evolved from a static claim into a living stress test of endurance, credibility, and deterrence in the South China Sea. In short, Second Thomas Shoal is not dangerous because of what it is, but because of what keeps happening there, again and again, in plain sight.
Under international law, piracy has a very specific meaning. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea defines it as violent acts committed for private ends on the high seas, typically by non-state actors, classic criminals, not uniformed personnel flying a national flag. By that strict definition, confrontations involving state-affiliated forces usually fall outside the legal box labeled piracy. That is where the complexity and the intent comes in. When Chinese Coast Guard or maritime personnel act under state authority, their actions are normally classified as law enforcement activity,
however aggressive or disputed. Legally speaking, that makes the Philippines' piracy label difficult to sustain in a courtroom sense. But Manila was not arguing a case before judges. It was speaking to an audience far larger than any tribunal. In practice, the term piracy functions less as a legal charge and more as a strategic signal. It strips away technical language and reframes the incident in moral terms that are immediately understood. Violence at sea, seizure of property, injury to sailors. It challenges the idea that such behavior can be dismissed as routine patrols or administrative enforcement. In one word, the Philippines recast coercion as criminality. The objective is clear. By using language that resonates beyond bilateral diplomacy, Manila seeks to internationalize the incident, to push it out of the narrow frame of a Philippines-China dispute and into the broader conversation about maritime norms, freedom of navigation, and acceptable conduct at sea. Whether or not piracy holds up legally, it succeeds rhetorically by forcing the world to ask a sharper question. When does enforcement stop looking like law and start looking like force? China rarely leads with gray holes and naval guns. Instead, it sends white ships. The primary instruments of pressure in contested waters are not the Navy, but the China Coast Guard and a vast network of maritime militia. Vessels that look civilian, behave aggressively, and operate in the space between peace and war. This is not accidental, it is design. The tactics are now well established. Chinese vessels block approaches, shadow targets at close range, board foreign boats, interfere with equipment, and maintain a constant presence that wears opponents down over time. These encounters are calibrated to stay just below the threshold that would justify a military response, while still imposing real physical and psychological pressure on crews at sea. No missiles, no declarations, just relentless friction. This approach is backed by scale. The China Coast Guard operates the largest Coast Guard fleet in the world, including multiple megacutters exceeding 10,000 tons, larger than many countries' frigates. Their size is not just symbolic. It allows Chinese ships to intimidate smaller vessels simply by proximity, to absorb collisions, and to dominate contested spaces without ever firing a shot. Presence becomes power. For years, Manila tried quiet diplomacy. It avoided cameras, softened language, and handled incidents through back channels. That approach has now clearly changed. The Philippines has embraced transparency as a tool of defense, publicly releasing incident footage, photographs, and detailed briefings after confrontations at sea. By showing what its crews face in real time, Manila is no longer asking the world to take its word. It is putting evidence on the table. This shift did not happen in a vacuum. The loss of effective access to Scarborough Shoal in 2012 was a turning point. Filipino fishermen were gradually pushed out, patrols were blocked, and control slipped without a single shot being fired. That experience left a lasting imprint on policymakers and the public alike. Silence and ambiguity did not preserve access. Visibility mattered. Operationally, the response has been steady rather than dramatic. The Philippine Coast Guard and Navy have increased patrol frequency in contested waters, while the armed forces of the Philippines have expanded maritime domain awareness, using radar, satellite tracking, aerial surveillance, and allied information sharing to reduce blind spots at sea. The goal is simple but critical. Know who is where, doing what, and record it. Public opinion has moved in parallel. Repeated national surveys show consistently high domestic support for defending maritime claims and for closer security cooperation with allies, particularly the United States. For many Filipinos, the issue is no longer abstract geopolitics. It is about fishermen blocked from traditional grounds, sailors injured on routine missions, and sovereignty tested in plain sight. The Philippine response reflects a hard-earned lesson. Deterrence is not only about ships and treaties, it is about